My name is Marcus Webb, and I manufacture addiction for a living. Not by choice, not because I wanted this life, but because 3 years ago, a raider warband attacked the caravan I was traveling with, and instead of killing me like they did everyone else, they dragged me back to their camp and put me to work doing the one thing I was good at: chemistry. Before the raid, I was a science teacher in Diamond City. Real education, not the propaganda they feed kids in most Commonwealth settlements. I taught actual chemistry, biology, physics, the kind of knowledge that used to be common before the bombs fell, but has become increasingly rare in the Wasteland. I was good at it. My students learned. Some of them even understood that science wasn't magic, that the world operated according to rules you could discover and use. The raiders didn't care about my teaching credentials. They cared that I knew how to measure compounds, calculate ratios, and transform raw materials into products with predictable effects. They cared that I understood the chemistry of addiction, the neuroscience of dependence, the pharmacology of control. They needed someone who could manufacture the chems that kept their operation running. And I had exactly the knowledge they required. The camp is located in an abandoned factory complex south of the Charles River. I don't know the exact location. They blindfolded me during transport, and I've never been allowed outside the compound since arrival. The buildings are reinforced concrete and steel, partially collapsed, but still structurally sound enough to provide shelter and security. The raiders have fortified the perimeter with scrap metal walls, guard towers, and mines that make unauthorized entry suicidal. My lab occupies what used to be a chemical processing facility. Most of the original equipment was destroyed or scavenged long ago, but the basic infrastructure remains. Ventilation systems, reinforced floors designed to contain spills, drainage that prevents chemical accumulation. The raiders have brought in salvaged equipment from across the Commonwealth. Chemistry stations pulled from pre-war hospitals, distillation apparatus scavenged from brewery ruins, measurement instruments looted from institute facilities. The setup is surprisingly sophisticated for a raider operation. Not because they care about safety or precision, but because effective chem production requires specific conditions. Temperature control prevents degradation of volatile compounds. Proper ventilation stops accidental poisoning of the manufacturing staff. Accurate measurement ensures consistent product quality. The raiders learned these lessons through trial and error. Previous Chem Cooks who got careless and produced batches that killed users or blew up the lab. I'm the 4th chemist they've captured in 3 years. The previous 3 died in various accidents or were executed for producing substandard product. The raiders don't have patience for learning curves. You either deliver what they need with the consistency they demand, or you become expendable very quickly. This knowledge provides powerful motivation to get things right the first time. My primary products are Jet, Psycho, and occasionally Mentats, when they can source the required materials. Jet is the bread and butter of the operation. Easy to manufacture, highly addictive, provides effects that raiders value. Psycho is more complex but essential for combat operations. Mentats are luxury items, usually reserved for trade with other factions or special rewards for the gang's leadership. The chemistry of Jet is disturbingly simple once you understand it. The active compounds come from Brahmin metabolites, specifically contaminated protein extracts that pre-war companies fed to cattle and which became integrated into Brahmin biology through generations of mutation. The animals excrete these compounds in their waste, and with proper processing, you can extract and concentrate them into an inhalable form. The raiders maintain a small herd of Brahmins specifically for this purpose. The animals are kept in pens near the lab, fed with scavenged vegetation and grain. their waste collected daily by slaves who've been assigned to the least desirable jobs in the compound. The smell is overwhelming. A combination of animal excrement, decomposition, and the chemical additives I use to accelerate fermentation. You never get used to it. You just learn to breathe through your mouth and try not to think about what you're handling. The extraction process involves fermenting the waste in sealed containers, collecting the gases that accumulate, and passing them through a series of filters and chemical baths that isolate the psychoactive compounds. The resulting liquid is then concentrated, stabilized with preservatives, and packaged into the small inhalers that make Jet portable and easy to use. The entire process takes about a week from collection to finished product. My daily quota is 60 units of Jet, 10 units of Psycho, and 5 units of Mentats when materials are available. These numbers were established through negotiation. The raiders initially demanded twice that output, until I explained that rushing production would compromise quality and potentially create batches toxic enough to kill users. They accepted reduced quotas in exchange for consistent product that wouldn't decimate their customer base or their own gang members. The work begins at dawn, not because I'm naturally an early riser, but because the raiders enforce a schedule that maximizes productive hours. I'm awakened by guards who unlock the chain securing me to the wall of my sleeping area, a corner of the lab sectioned off with sheet metal and containing a cot, a bucket for waste, and nothing else. The chain is long enough to reach all areas of the lab, but prevents escape through the doors or windows. Breakfast is protein paste and water delivered by the same guards who wake me. The paste is synthesized from Brahmin meat, grain, and whatever vegetables the raiders can acquire through raids or trade. It tastes like industrial sludge, but provides adequate calories and nutrients to maintain physical function. I eat mechanically, fuel for a body that exists primarily to operate the chemistry station. The first task each morning is inventory and quality control. I check the status of ongoing fermentation batches, monitor the condition of stored reagents, verify that equipment is functioning within acceptable parameters. This routine inspection prevents disasters, contaminated batches, equipment failures, shortages that would prevent meeting quota. The raiders don't care about excuses. They care about results. Quality control for existing product involves testing samples from previous batches. I have a small population of rats that serve as test subjects, captured from the factory ruins and kept in cages near the lab bench. I administer measured doses and observe the effects. Jet should produce immediate hyperactivity followed by euphoria. Psycho should trigger aggression and reduced pain sensitivity. Mentats should increase problem-solving behavior in simple maze tasks. The rats die frequently, some from the chems themselves, some from the side effects of prolonged exposure, some simply from the stress of captivity and constant drug administration. The raiders replace them regularly from the seemingly endless supply that infests the factory. I've stopped naming them or thinking of them as anything except biological measuring instruments. Emotional attachment to test subjects is a luxury I can't afford. After quality control comes the actual production work. Jet manufacturing requires constant monitoring. Fermentation rates vary based on temperature, humidity, and the specific metabolism of the Brahmin providing raw materials. I've learned to adjust processing times based on subtle indicators: the color of the fermenting waste, the smell of the gases produced, the consistency of the collected compounds. It's as much art as science, requiring intuition developed through hundreds of batches. Psycho is chemically more complex. The base compound is synthesized from hub flower extracts, combined with various pre-war chemical reagents the raiders scavenge from abandoned hospitals and laboratories. The synthesis requires precise temperature control and careful timing. Too hot, and the compounds break down into useless byproducts. Too cool and the reaction doesn't complete. Getting it wrong means wasted materials and potentially violent reactions with the Raider leadership. The formula I use for Psycho is modified from pre-war military research. The original version was designed to create fearless soldiers who could fight through injuries that would incapacitate normal humans. The side effects, psychological damage, addiction, long-term cognitive impairment, were considered acceptable costs for short-term combat effectiveness. The Raiders don't care about side effects. They want the combat boost without worrying about what happens to users afterward. Mentats are the most challenging to produce because the required materials, brain fungus, and specific cleaning agents, are difficult to source consistently. The Raiders prioritize acquisition of materials for Jet and Psycho, treating Mentats as optional luxury items. When I do have supplies, the synthesis process is straightforward, but requires attention to detail. The compounds that boost cognitive function are chemically delicate and degrade quickly if not properly stabilized. The work is monotonous, but demands constant attention. A momentary lapse in concentration can ruin an entire batch or create something toxic. I've seen the results of contaminated chems, users who suffer seizures, cardiac arrest, or psychotic breaks that end in violence against themselves or others. The Raiders hold the cook responsible for these failures, regardless of whether the problem stems from poor materials, equipment malfunction, or user error in administration. By midday, I've usually completed the morning's synthesis work and moved on to packaging and quality verification. Each finished unit must be tested before distribution. I use myself as the primary test subject for new batches, taking measured doses and documenting the effects. The logic is simple. If the product is toxic or defective, better I suffer the consequences than valuable Raiders or paying customers. This self-testing has made me intimately familiar with the subjective experience of the chems I manufacture. Jet produces a rush of euphoria and hyper-awareness that lasts about 10 minutes before crashing into fatigue and depression. Psycho creates a state of aggressive confidence where pain becomes distant and abstract. Mentats sharpen focus and accelerate cognitive processing, but leave you mentally exhausted afterward. I'm addicted to all three now, not from recreational use, from the constant low-level exposure that comes from working with these compounds daily, from testing every batch, from the accidental inhalation and skin absorption that occurs despite precautions. The addiction provides another layer of control. Even if I could escape the compound, I'd need regular doses to avoid withdrawal symptoms that would leave me incapacitated. The Raiders understand this dynamic perfectly. They've engineered my captivity at multiple levels: physical chains, armed guards, but most effectively through chemical dependency. I'm trapped not just by walls and weapons, but by neurotransmitter imbalances that require their products to maintain baseline function. Every day I work, every batch I produce, tightens the chains of my own addiction. Afternoon work focuses on preparing materials for the next day's production. This involves processing raw ingredients, cleaning equipment, measuring reagents, setting up fermentation vats. The preparation is methodical and time-consuming, but essential for maintaining consistent output. The Raiders have zero tolerance for missing quota due to poor planning or resource management. The materials come from various sources. Brahmin waste is collected on site, but most other reagents must be scavenged or traded. The Raiders conduct regular raids on hospitals, laboratories, and chemical supply facilities across the Commonwealth. They know exactly what I need and prioritize acquisition accordingly. Dead chemists can't produce chems, but chemists without materials are equally useless. Sometimes the raiding parties bring back salvage that includes unexpected finds. Pre-war textbooks on chemistry, laboratory equipment in surprisingly good condition, samples of compounds I haven't seen in years. These discoveries occasionally allow me to experiment with new formulations or improve existing processes. The raiders encourage this innovation as long as it increases output or improves product quality. I've developed several custom variants through this experimentation. Jet fuel, a more potent version that provides stronger effects but shorter duration. Psycho buff, combining Psycho's aggression boost with strength enhancement. Berry Mentats, a variation that improves social manipulation skills, particularly valued by the gang's traders and negotiators. Each successful innovation increases my value to the raiders, making me more expensive to replace and therefore slightly safer from arbitrary execution. But innovation is a double-edged blade. Each new product, each improved formula, each breakthrough in manufacturing efficiency makes me more valuable but also more complicit in what the raiders do with my creations. I'm not just maintaining their chem supply, I'm actively improving their capacity for violence and exploitation. The moral weight of this complicity becomes heavier with each batch I produce. The testing process for new formulations is particularly grim. The raiders bring me prisoners, people captured during raids, survivors from destroyed settlements, travelers unlucky enough to be taken alive. These prisoners become test subjects for experimental chems or untested batches that might be toxic. I administer compounds and document the effects while they scream, seize, or simply collapse as their nervous systems fail. I tell myself I'm not responsible for their suffering. I'm just conducting necessary research under coercion. But the distinction between forced participation and active collaboration grows thinner with each prisoner who dies from something I created. At what point does survival stop being justification? At what point does complicity become collaboration? The evening brings the most dangerous part of my work, distribution to the gang members. The raiders come to my lab to pick up their personal supplies, and these interactions carry constant risk. Chems make people unpredictable. Users high on Psycho are prone to violence. Those experiencing jet crashes become irritable and unstable. A cook who produces substandard product or runs short on someone's personal stash can quickly become the target of drug-fueled aggression. I've learned to read the signs that indicate someone is reaching their breaking point. The jerky movements and dilated pupils of Psycho users. The rapid speech and paranoid scanning of jet addicts. The cognitive fog of withdrawal that makes simple instructions hard to process. I adjust my behavior accordingly, speaking calmly, moving slowly, never making sudden gestures that might be interpreted as threatening. The gang's leadership, a former gunner named Cuddy, who styles himself a warlord, takes personal interest in the chem operation. He visits the lab weekly to verify production numbers, inspect product quality, and ensure I'm not attempting sabotage or theft. These inspections are terrifying. Cuddy is smart enough to be dangerous, but unstable enough to be unpredictable. He understands that I'm valuable, but also knows that value only protects me as long as I remain useful. During one early inspection, Cuddy explained the economics of the chem trade with brutal clarity. Jet costs almost nothing to produce, but sells for significant profit. Psycho commands premium prices from other raider gangs and even legitimate traders who supply them to mercs and security forces. Mentats are luxury goods that can be exchanged for weapons, ammunition, or information. The entire operation generates revenue that far exceeds traditional raiding returns. This revelation changed how I understood my role. I'm not just a captive producing chems for gang consumption. I'm running a pharmaceutical operation that generates the capital that keeps the gang viable. The raiders could survive through robbery and scavenging, But the chem trade gives them economic power that translates into military strength. Every batch I produce helps them buy better weapons, recruit more members, and expand their operational territory. The mathematics are inescapable. My labor produces approximately 60 units of jet per day, each unit selling for about 20 caps. That's 1,200 caps daily from jet alone, not counting Psycho or Mentats. In a month, I generate roughly 36,000 caps of revenue, more than most Commonwealth settlements produce in a year. I'm not just valuable to the raiders. I'm the foundation of their economic model. This understanding brought a terrible realization. I'm probably the most important person in the entire gang. Cuddy leads, but leadership is replaceable. Fighters provide muscle, but muscle is abundant in the Wasteland. I provide the specialized knowledge that transforms worthless Brahmin waste into concentrated capital. The gang could survive without individual members, but would collapse without steady chem production. The danger of this realization is obvious. Being more valuable than the boss creates political dynamics that can get you killed. Cuddy is smart enough to recognize my importance, but insecure enough to feel threatened by it. He maintains control through a careful balance of dependency and terror, making me irreplaceable while ensuring I remain terrified of the consequences of attempting to leverage that value. The other gang members understand the power structure too. Some resent me for the privileged position despite being a captive. Others try to cultivate relationships, offering small favors or extra rations in exchange for priority access to fresh batches or custom formulations. These social dynamics create a complex web of obligations and threats that I must navigate while remaining nominally subordinate to everyone, despite being functionally critical to everything. Night brings relative freedom. The guards lock me into my sleeping area, but otherwise leave me alone. This isolation is both blessing and curse. The solitude provides respite from constant surveillance and the tension of working under threat. But it also means hours alone with thoughts I'd prefer to avoid, with memories of the life I lost, with awareness of what I've become. I think about my students in Diamond City. What happened to them after I disappeared? Did anyone search for me, or did they assume I'd been killed in the raid? The Commonwealth is full of people who vanish without explanation. One more missing teacher probably didn't warrant extended investigation, especially with the Brotherhood and Institute conflicts consuming everyone's attention. I think about the people who've died from chems I manufactured. How many raiders high on my psycho have killed innocent settlers? How many addicts desperate for my jet have robbed or murdered to feed their dependency? How many lives have been destroyed by products that pass through my hands on their way from raw materials to finished addiction? The guilt would be unbearable if I let myself feel it fully. So I practice the same compartmentalization I used during prisoner testing. The suffering isn't my responsibility. I'm acting under duress. My choices are constrained to the point where meaningful moral agency barely exists. These rationalizations help me sleep at night, though the sleep is always restless and full of dreams about faces I've never seen, but whose deaths I've enabled. The weeks blur into months. Production continues with mechanical regularity. Quotas are met, the gang prospers. My value increases as my skills improve and my custom formulations gain reputation in the chem trade networks. Cuddy starts receiving requests from other gangs for specific compounds, and I'm tasked with developing products to meet their specifications. This expansion brings new materials and new challenges. A gang operating near the glowing sea wants radiation-resistant stimulants. Operators from Nuka World request intelligence-enhancing compounds for their business operations. A disciple leader asks for a psycho variant that increases pain tolerance without reducing cognitive function. Each request requires research, experimentation, and usually several test subjects who don't survive the development process. The technical challenges are intellectually engaging in ways I haven't experienced since leaving Diamond City. I'm solving real problems, pushing the boundaries of Wasteland chemistry, creating compounds that didn't exist before. If the context were different, if I were doing this work voluntarily in a proper laboratory for medical purposes, I'd be proud of these achievements. Instead, I'm developing better tools for violence and exploitation while prisoners die in my experiments. 6 months into captivity, I make a discovery that changes everything. While analyzing Brahmin metabolites for jet production, I identify a compound with unusual properties. It's structurally similar to the psychoactive agents that make jet work, but the effects are different. Instead of euphoria and energy, it produces profound sedation and suggestibility. Users become docile, compliant, willing to accept instructions without question. The implications are immediately obvious. This isn't a recreational chem or combat stimulant. It's a control mechanism. Administered properly, it could turn resistant captives into cooperative slaves. It could pacify hostile settlements without violence. It could be the difference between maintaining power through constant force and maintaining power through chemical subjugation. I should destroy my notes and pretend the discovery never happened. Giving the raiders this compound would exponentially increase their capacity for evil. Every ethical principle I still possess screams that this knowledge must not be shared. But I also recognize that refusing to report the discovery would be suicide. Cuddy would view it as sabotage or theft of gang property. The guards who monitor my work would eventually notice the unusual synthesis procedures. Secrecy isn't an option, so I report the discovery to Cuddy, explaining the compound's properties and potential applications. His reaction is immediate interest, followed by demands for rapid development. He wants the formula perfected and production scaled up as quickly as possible. The strategic value of a compliance chem vastly exceeds the commercial value of existing products. Development takes 3 weeks and 12 test subjects. The compound's effects are dose-dependent. Too little produces no effect. Too much causes respiratory depression and death. Finding the therapeutic window requires careful titration, which means watching prisoners die slowly from overdoses or suffer through inadequate doses that leave them partially conscious and terrified. The final formulation works exactly as predicted. Administered via injection, it produces deep sedation within minutes, followed by a suggestible state lasting several hours. Users will follow instructions, answer questions truthfully, and perform tasks they would normally resist. The effects wear off gradually with minimal hangover or long-term cognitive impairment. It's perfect for what the raiders want to use it for. Cuddy names it docile and immediately begins using it on captured settlers. The results are strategically transformative. Resistant prisoners become cooperative information sources. Hostile settlement leaders accept raider demands after properly dosed negotiations. Slaves who might have caused trouble are rendered compliant through regular administration. The gang's operational efficiency increases dramatically, and I'm responsible for all of it. Every forcibly extracted confession, every coerced cooperation, every person whose will is chemically overridden to serve raider interests. The blood was already on my hands from jet and psycho production, but docile represents a qualitative escalation. I've created a tool specifically designed for the elimination of consent. The moral injury is devastating. I can't rationalize this away as forced participation. Developing docile required active problem-solving and creative chemistry. I didn't just follow orders. I innovated, experimented, refined the formula through careful research. Whatever justifications I'd been using to maintain psychological equilibrium collapse under the weight of this complicity. Sleep becomes nearly impossible. When I do manage to drift off, nightmares about docile victims fill my unconsciousness. I wake up thinking about the settlers who'll be dosed today, who'll surrender information or cooperation they die before giving voluntarily. The chain around my ankle suddenly seems less binding than the chains I've helped forge for others. The gang's success with docile attracts attention from other raider groups. Word spreads through the Commonwealth's criminal networks about a compliance chem that actually works. Cuddy starts receiving offers from gangs across the region, trade agreements that would distribute docile widely. My little lab is becoming the center of a chemical weapons proliferation network that will affect thousands of people. I begin making mistakes. Subtle errors in measurements, accidental contamination of batches, equipment failures that seem like bad luck, but which I've carefully engineered. The errors are small enough to be plausible as accidents, but frequent enough to slow production. Cuddy notices the decline in output and threatens consequences if quality doesn't improve. The threats are specific and terrifying. He describes in detail what happens to chemists who become unreliable. Previous cooks who developed sudden quality issues and found themselves serving as test subjects for their own experimental batches. The message is clear: produce consistently or become part of the production process yourself. I reduce the sabotage but don't eliminate it entirely. Small delays, minor imperfections in finished product, occasional batch failures that waste materials without being obvious sabotage. It's not resistance exactly, more like friction in a machine that's running too smoothly. The raiders still get their chems, but the operation is slightly less efficient than it could be. 8 months into captivity, new prisoners arrive, a group captured during a raid on a small farming settlement. Among them is a woman named Sarah, who was the settlement's doctor. She has medical training, understands pharmacology, and looks at me with undisguised hatred when she realizes what I'm producing. Her contempt is justified and cuts deeper than any raider threat ever could. The raiders assign Sarah to assist me in the lab. They see her medical knowledge as valuable and want to expand production capacity. Working alongside her is psychological torture. She watches me manufacture the compounds that destroyed her settlement, that turned her neighbors into addicts or compliant slaves. She doesn't speak to me except when necessary, and when she does, her voice carries the weight of moral judgment I can't refute. After 2 weeks of hostile silence, Sarah finally confronts me. "Why?" she asks. "Why do you help them? You're educated. You understand what these chems do. How do you justify manufacturing addiction and enslavement?" I have no good answer. I tell her about the coercion, the chains, the threats, the addiction that traps me as surely as the prisoners in their cages. She listens without sympathy. "Everyone here is coerced," she replies. "Everyone faces threats. The difference is, most of us don't have the specialized skills that make us valuable enough to keep alive. You have leverage you're not using." The conversation plants seeds I can't ignore. She's right. I do have leverage. The gang needs me more than I need them. Yes, escape is difficult. Yes, withdrawal would be agonizing. Yes, the raiders would hunt me. But continued cooperation means becoming more deeply complicit in atrocities that multiply with each batch I produce. At what point does survival stop being worth the cost? Sarah and I begin planning secretly. Not escape exactly, that seems impossible with the guard rotations and fortifications. Something else, a way to undermine the operation from within without triggering immediate retaliation. We identify vulnerabilities in the production process, create plausible scenarios for catastrophic failure that couldn't be traced to deliberate sabotage. The plan crystallizes over weeks of careful preparation. A cascading equipment failure that would destroy the lab and eliminate the gang's chem production capacity. The failure would need to seem accidental, a combination of worn equipment, volatile chemicals, and bad luck. Executed properly, it would be devastating to the gang's economy while appearing to be simple industrial accident. The risks are enormous. If the raiders suspect sabotage, they'll kill everyone involved slowly and publicly as an example. If the destruction is too complete, they might decide the investment in rebuilding isn't worthwhile and simply execute the chemists who've become liabilities. If the timing is wrong, we might die in the explosion we're trying to cause. But the alternative is continuing indefinitely, producing ever more sophisticated tools for exploitation and violence. My value keeps me alive, but also makes me more responsible for what the gang does with my products. The leverage Sarah identified cuts both ways. I'm too valuable to kill, but valuable enough that my continued cooperation enables significant evil. We choose the night of a major chem delivery, when the lab is fully stocked with volatile compounds and the gang is distracted by preparations for a large raid. The plan is simple. Create a chemical mixture that will ignite after a delay, triggering a chain reaction with stored materials that will level the entire lab section. Sarah and I will be in the lab when it starts, making the accident theory credible, but we'll have exit routes prepared that might allow survival. The mixture I prepare is precisely calculated. Phosphorus compounds mixed with oxidizers and accelerants, stored in containers that will fail sequentially, creating multiple ignition points throughout the facility. The timing is set for midnight, late enough that most guards are less alert, early enough that we have darkness for attempted escape. At 11:45, I activate the first reaction. The compounds begin their slow burn toward ignition temperature. Sarah and I position ourselves near a structural weakness we've identified, a partially collapsed wall that leads to the factory's exterior. The guards notice nothing unusual. The chemical reactions are invisible and silent in their early stages. At midnight exactly, the first container fails. The ignition is spectacular. A flash of blue-white light followed by intense heat that sets fire to everything flammable within 20 feet. The stored jet immediately begins combusting, adding its own volatility to the conflagration. Other containers start failing in rapid succession, each one adding to the growing inferno. Sarah and I run for the weak wall as alarms sound throughout the compound. The guards are confused, trying to understand whether this is an attack or an accident. The distinction won't matter soon. The fire is spreading too fast to contain, and the stored chemicals are creating an increasingly toxic atmosphere. We hit the wall together, forcing our way through rubble and rebar into the open air beyond. The explosion, when it comes, is larger than I calculated. The entire lab section detonates, sending debris hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave knocks us flat. When I look back, the factory is completely engulfed in flames that climb hundreds of feet into the night sky. Secondary explosions continue as stored materials catch fire or react with the heat. We run. Behind us, the raiders are trying to organize response to what appears to be a catastrophic accident. They're not looking for escaping prisoners. They're trying to save their compound from complete destruction. By the time they realize the chemists are missing, we've put significant distance between ourselves and the burning facility. The withdrawal hits within hours. My body has become dependent on the constant low-level exposure to chems that lab work provided. Without those compounds, my nervous system starts failing. Tremors, nausea, sweating, muscle cramps, all the classic symptoms of simultaneous withdrawal from multiple addictive substances. Sarah helps when she can, but we have no med supplies and no safe place to stop. We travel north, avoiding settlements and major routes. The raiders will be looking for us, and any place we stop becomes a potential trap. Sarah has contacts in the Commonwealth, Minutemen sympathizers who might help if we can reach them. But that means surviving long enough to make contact while my body is literally coming apart from chemical dependency. The first week is hell. I'm barely functional, reduced to stumbling forward through sheer willpower while Sarah half carries me. She never complains, never suggests abandoning me despite how much I'm slowing us down. Her resilience shames me. She's suffering too, from the physical trauma of captivity and the psychological weight of everything she's lost. But she keeps moving forward. By the second week, the acute withdrawal symptoms begin to ease. I can walk unassisted, though my hands still shake and sleep remains elusive. We've made contact with a Minutemen patrol and are being escorted to a safe settlement where Sarah has friends. The raiders haven't found us yet, though we've seen their search parties in the distance. Cuddy won't give up easily. We've cost him too much. The settlement is small but well defended, built around a pre-war building that provides solid structure and clear sight lines. The Minutemen here are veterans who've dealt with raiders before and understand the threat level. They're willing to shelter us temporarily, but can't guarantee long-term protection. The Commonwealth is too dangerous. The raider network's too extensive. Sarah adapts quickly. Her medical skills are immediately valuable, and the settlement needs a doctor. She has purpose again, has a way to help people that doesn't involve collaboration with violence. I watch her work with a mixture of admiration and envy. She's moving forward while I'm stuck in the past, paralyzed by guilt about what I've done and fear of what comes next. I can't practice chemistry anymore. The thought of working at a chemistry station triggers panic attacks. My hands shake so badly I couldn't measure compounds accurately, even if I wanted to. The knowledge that made me valuable to the raiders has become a psychological prison. Every bit of expertise I possess is tainted by how it was used. The settlement offers me other work: guard duty, farming, equipment repair. But I struggle with all of it. The withdrawal has left me physically weakened. The trauma of captivity has damaged my ability to trust or connect with others. I exist in a state of suspended animation, neither dead nor truly alive, haunted by the faces of prisoners who died in my experiments and slaves who were chemically robbed of their will. One night, the Minutemen scouts report raider activity nearby. A large warband moving through the area, asking questions about escaped captives, offering rewards for information. Cuddy has found our general location and is bringing enough force to make extraction possible even from a defended settlement. The Minutemen can probably hold them off, but the cost will be high and the settlement will be marked for future retaliation. The math is simple. My presence here endangers everyone. The raiders want me specifically: my knowledge, my skills, my death if I can't be recaptured. Staying means bringing violence to people who've shown me kindness. Leaving means facing Cuddy alone, which ends only one way. There's no good option, just degrees of bad. I prepare to leave before dawn, planning to slip away and lead the raiders away from the settlement. Sarah discovers me packing the minimal supplies I'll need for what will probably be a very short journey. She doesn't try to stop me or argue. She just asks one question. Was it worth it? I don't have to ask what she means. Was destroying the lab worth the cost? Worth the deaths of raiders who burned when the facility exploded? Worth the risk of recapture and the certain death that would follow? Worth the guilt of all the evil I enabled before finding the courage to resist? I tell her the truth. I don't know. The lab is gone, which means fewer chems in the Commonwealth, which means less addiction and fewer chemically enabled atrocities. But the raiders will eventually rebuild. They'll capture another chemist with knowledge I can't unshare. The cycle will continue with or without my participation. Individual resistance might slow the machine, but it doesn't stop it. Sarah nods like she expected that answer. Then do something else with what you know, she says. Teach people how to identify and resist chemical manipulation. Help settlements recognize and counteract raider chem tactics. Use your expertise for something that isn't just survival or resistance. Use it for actual reconstruction. The suggestion is simultaneously obvious and impossible. How do I teach chemistry to Commonwealth settlers when working with chemicals triggers panic attacks? How do I discuss pharmacology when every compound I mention carries memories of prisoners dying? How do I move forward when the past weighs so heavily that each step feels like moving through concrete? But the alternative is surrendering to despair or to the raiders, and neither is acceptable. Sarah is right. The knowledge I possess can be used constructively. The same understanding that let me manufacture addiction could help develop treatments for it. The expertise that created docile might lead to compounds that counteract chemical coercion. The choice isn't between guilt and innocence. That ship sailed long ago. The choice is between letting the guilt paralyze me or channeling it into something useful. The Raider warband never arrives. Minutemen scouts report they turned back after hitting resistance at another settlement. Whether Cuddy gave up the search or is simply regrouping isn't clear. Either way, I have temporary reprieve. Time to decide whether I'm going to spend my remaining days running or trying to build something from the wreckage of what I've been. I stay in the settlement, not permanently. Nowhere is safe permanently in the Commonwealth. But long enough to start teaching basic chemistry to anyone interested in learning. Not chem manufacturing, practical applications, water purification, fertilizer production, understanding which salvaged chemicals are useful and which are lethal. The kind of knowledge that helps settlements survive without helping raiders exploit. The work is therapeutic in ways I didn't expect. Teaching forces me to think about chemistry as something other than weaponized addiction. Sharing knowledge with people who use it constructively helps balance the scale against years of producing compounds used for violence. The balance isn't equal. Nothing will ever make what I did right. But it's something other than complete surrender to guilt. Sarah works alongside me when her medical duties allow. We've become something like friends, bonded by shared trauma and the understanding that survival requires finding meaning in what comes next, rather than dwelling on what came before. She's teaching me that recovery isn't about forgetting or forgiving yourself. It's about accepting that you can't change the past, but refusing to let the past determine your future.